Well, thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see all your shining faces here. And as you know, today's talk is Shifting Paradigms and the Glorious Art of Proactivity, and it is based on a small part of this book here, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. So Stephen Covey's job, he's not with us anymore, but his job was going all over the country and transforming individuals and businesses to be more effective and to have more satisfying lives. And he was very, very effective at his job. And he spills all of his secrets here in this book, in case you're wondering. And one of the things that Stephen Covey points out is that a lot of self-help books start with kind of a superficial level towards personal change, like they try to tell you how to trick people into liking you by pretending you're interested in the same things as them or smiling at them or whatever. And he says these surface level kind of solutions, they don't lead to true effectiveness, they don't lead to long-term change. What's needed is what he calls a character ethic, where we focus within ourselves on the very best qualities of character which we have, and we work on our character. He calls this the inside-out approach. So we change what's inside of us, and because what's inside of us changes, what's around us changes also. So we don't work on what's outside of us, we work on what's inside. But in order to create these deep personal changes, often we have to shift paradigms. And a paradigm is a set of beliefs that you have about your relationship with reality, or we can think of a paradigm as a map. So imagine you're in Chicago and you're trying to find 1134 8th Street, and the map you have of Chicago is completely wrong. All the streets are mislabeled, everything's just jumbled up. Your chances of finding 1134 8th Street are very small under those circumstances. And if you work harder and if you go faster, you'll just end up at the wrong place faster. It's not helpful. So we need to examine our own paradigm. Say, is this a map that will really get me where I want to go? And he quotes Albert Einstein, who once said, "The significant problems that we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them." So Einstein was talking about shifting paradigms. He's saying the paradigm we have now created these problems. So we need to shift our paradigms so that we can rise to a higher level. We can solve these problems. And Covey has a wonderful example of a mini paradigm shift that he once experienced. I remember a mini paradigm shift I experienced one Sunday morning on a subway in New York. People were sitting quietly, some reading newspapers, some lost in thought, some resting with their eyes closed. It was a calm, peaceful scene. Then suddenly a man and his children entered the subway car. The children were so loud and rambunctious that instantly the whole climate changed. The man sat down next to me and closed his eyes, apparently oblivious to the situation. The children were yelling back and forth, throwing things, even grabbing people's papers. It was very disturbing, and yet the man sitting next to me did nothing. It was difficult not to feel irritated. I could not believe that he could be so insensitive as to let his children run wild like that and do nothing about it, taking no responsibility at all. It was easy to see that everyone else on the subway felt irritated too. So finally, with what I felt was unusual patience and restraint, I turned to him and said, "Sir, your children are really disturbing a lot of people. I wonder if you couldn't control them a little more." The man lifted his gaze as if to come to a consciousness of the situation for the first time, and said softly, "Oh, you're right. I guess I should do something about it. We just came from the hospital where their mother died about an hour ago. I don't know what to think, and I guess they don't know how to handle it either." So can you imagine what I felt at that moment? My paradigm shifted. Suddenly I saw things differently, And because I saw differently, I felt differently, I thought differently, and I behaved differently, my irritation vanished. I didn't have to worry about controlling my attitude or my behavior. My heart was filled with the man's pain. Feelings of sympathy and compassion flowed freely. Your wife just died. Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you tell me about it? What can I do to help? Everything changed in an instant. So we learned that when we change our paradigms, everything else changes. Our attitudes, our behavior just changes along with it. And so when we are working on our character, we need to know, what is our character? And he says that our character is a composite of all of our habits. And he quotes the great educator, Horace Mann, who once said, habits are like a cable. We weave a strand of it every day, and soon it cannot be broken. And Stephen Covey says that Horace Mann is wrong. He knows that habits can be broken. He's broken them. He's seen many people break them. What Horace Mann was talking about was actually the deterministic paradigm. Voila. As you can see, we have a very high-tech visual aid here. I like to keep up with the latest thing. That's my thing. So this is a model of the deterministic paradigm, which is also known as the reactive paradigm. So we experience a stimulus, something happens to us, we have an automatic response to that stimulus, and our response is conditioned by our upbringing or our genetics or our environment. So according to the deterministic paradigm, this just automatically happens. We don't have much choice. Maybe the stimulus is someone cuts in front of me in traffic, and my response might be that I get angry. So according to the reactive paradigm, I have no choice. I'm just always going to get angry when someone cuts in front of me. Or maybe the stimulus is my wife asks me to wash the dishes, and my response is I pretend I can't hear her. You know? Just kidding, honey. You know I'd never do that, right? And so it's the same basic idea. And Covey points out that in his experience, it's our response that can hurt us. It's not the stimulus that hurts us. If anything does, it's the response. So he says he knows from this experience that this is not an accurate paradigm of human psychology, nor is it a helpful one. It's not going to get us where we want to go. This is the proactive paradigm of human psychology. So in between the stimulus and the response, we have the freedom to choose. We have the freedom to have responsibility, which means, he says, responsibility is made up of the word response and the word ability. In other words, the ability to choose our response. So we can use these faculties to help us exercise our freedom to choose. We can use our self-awareness, like I could observe myself and say, I just consciously noticed that I always pretend I can't hear her when she asks me to wash the dishes. Maybe I should make a more conscious choice about that. And we can use our imagination to imagine a different response to the stimulus that we experience. Like maybe we could get a dishwasher, or maybe we could get crazy and I could wash the dishes, which I do. It's just a joke. Yeah. And we can use our conscience to say, of course I should wash the dishes some of the time. And we can use our self-will to say, I'm going to choose a response which fits my needs rather than some automatic response that I didn't think about. And so, with the proactive paradigm, He has a wonderful example of someone who spent much of her life with the reactive paradigm, like this, and then shifted her paradigm to the proactive paradigm. So, once in Sacramento, when I was speaking on the subject of proactivity, a woman in the audience stood up in the middle of my presentation and started talking excitedly. It was a large audience, and as a number of people turned to look at her, she suddenly became aware of what she was doing, grew embarrassed, and sat back down. But she seemed to find it difficult to restrain herself and started talking to the people around her. She seemed so happy. I could hardly wait for a break to find out what had happened. When it finally came, I immediately went to her and asked if she would be willing to share her experience. "You can't imagine what's just happened to me," she exclaimed. "I'm a full-time nurse to the most miserable, ungrateful man you can possibly imagine. Nothing I do is good enough for him. He never expresses appreciation. He hardly even acknowledges me. He constantly harps at me and finds fault with everything I do. This man has made my life miserable, and I often take my frustration out on my family. The other nurses feel the same way. We almost pray for his demise. And for you to have the gall to stand up there and to suggest that nothing can hurt me, that no one can hurt me without my consent, and I have chosen my own emotional life of being miserable, well, there was just no way I could buy into that." But I kept thinking about it. I really went inside myself and began to ask, do I have the power to choose my response? When I finally realized that I do have the power, when I finally swallowed that bitter pill and realized that I had chosen to be miserable, I also realized, I also realized that I could choose not to be miserable. At that moment, I stood up. I felt as though I was being let out of San Quentin. I wanted to yell to the whole world, "I am free. I am let out of prison. No longer am I going to be controlled by the treatment of some person." And Covey goes on to say, it's not what happens to us, the stimulus, but it's our response to what happens to us that hurts us. Now, of course, things can hurt us physically or economically and can cause sorrow, but our character, our basic identity, does not have to be hurt at all. In fact, our most difficult experiences become the crucibles that forge our character and develop the internal powers, the freedom to handle difficult circumstances in the future, and to inspire others to do so as well. Now, if you're like me, and let's face it, no one is, but if you were like me, you would be thinking, well, that's all well and good if someone's hurting your feelings, but what if something's physically harming you or devastating your financial existence? Can you just say, oh, it's not the stimulus that hurts me, it's just my response to it that hurts me? And in answer to those questions, Covey tells the catalytic story of Viktor Frankl, which some of you may be a little familiar with. Frankl was a determinist raised in the tradition of Freudian psychology, which postulates that whatever happens to you as a child shapes your character and personality and basically governs your whole life. The limits and parameters of your life are set, and basically you can't do much about it. Frankl was also a psychiatrist and a Jew. He was imprisoned in the death camps of Nazi Germany, where he experienced things that were so repugnant to our sense of decency that we shudder to even repeat them. His parents, his brother, and his wife all died in the camps. Except for his sister, his entire family perished. Frankl himself suffered torture and innumerable indignities, never knowing from one moment to the next if his path would lead to the ovens or if he would be among the saved who would remove the bodies or shovel out the ashes of those so fated. One day, naked and alone in a small room, he began to become aware of what he later called the last of the human freedoms, the freedom his Nazi captors could not take away. They could control his entire environment. They could do what they wanted to his body. But Viktor Frankl himself was a self-aware being who could look as an observer at his very involvement. His basic identity was intact. He could decide within himself how all of this was going to affect him. Between what happened to him, or the stimulus, and his response to it was his freedom or power to choose that response. In the midst of his experiences, Frankl would project himself into different circumstances, such as lecturing to his students after his release from the death camps. He would describe himself in the classroom in his mind's eye and give his students the lessons he was learning during his very torture. Through a series of such disciplines, mental, emotional, and moral, principally using memory and imagination, he exercised his small embryonic freedom until it grew larger and larger, until he had more freedom than his Nazi captors. They had more liberty, more options to choose from in their environment, but he had more freedom, more internal power to exercise his options. He became an inspiration to those around him, even to some of the guards. He helped others find meaning in their suffering and dignity in their prison existence. In the midst of the most degrading circumstances imaginable, Frankl used the human endowment of self-awareness to discover a fundamental principle about the nature of man. Between stimulus and response, man has the freedom to choose. As Gandhi once said, they cannot take away our self-respect if we do not give it to them. So, Covey goes on to say that whenever we think the problem is out there, that thought is the problem. And when I read that, I thought, but what if we're out of donuts? Like, that problem seems like that's out there. But he says I still have freedom to choose. So Covey points out that it's easy for us to get caught up in wasting our time and energy worrying about things that are outside of our circle of influence, things we have no control over. So if we are worried about something the president did, or the economy, or the situation in the Middle East, we're definitely not helping those situations which are outside of our control. We're creating negative energy within ourselves, and that's being reflected in what's going on around us, and our circle of influence is shrinking because of that negative energy. So when we focus on the things that are within our circle of influence, we expand our circle of influence. We can do more things. And he has a very powerful story about a man who did just that. He focused on things that were within his circle of influence. It is inspiring to realize that in choosing our response to circumstance, we powerfully affect our circumstance. When we change one part of the chemical formula, we change the nature of the results. I worked with one organization for several years that was headed by a very dynamic person. He could read trends. He was creative, talented, capable, and brilliant, and everyone knew it. But he had a very dictatorial style of management. He tended to treat people like gophers, as if they didn't have any judgment. His manner of speaking to those who worked in the organization was, go for this, go for that, now do this, now do that, I'll make the decisions. The net effect was that he alienated almost the entire executive team surrounding him. They would gather in the corridors and complain to each other about him. And their discussion was all very sophisticated, very articulate, as if they were trying to help the situation. But they did it endlessly, absolving themselves of responsibility, or the ability to respond, absolving themselves of responsibility in the name of the president's weaknesses. You can't imagine what's happened this time, someone would say. The other day he went into my department. I had everything all laid out, but he came in and gave totally different signals. Everything I'd done for months was shot, just like that. I don't know how I'm supposed to keep working for him. How long will it be until he retires? He's only 59, someone else would respond. Do you think you can survive for 6 more years? I don't know. He's the kind of person they probably won't retire anyway. But one of the executives was proactive. He took the initiative. He was driven by values, not feelings. And he anticipated, he empathized, he read the situation. He was not blind to the president's weaknesses, but instead of criticizing them, he would compensate for them. Where the president was weak in his style, he'd try to buffer his own people and make such weaknesses irrelevant. And he'd work with the president's strengths, his vision, his talent, and creativity. This man focused on his circle of influence. He was treated like a gopher also, but he could do more than what was expected. He anticipated the president's need. He read with empathy the president's underlying concern, so that when he presented information, he also gave his analysis and his recommendations based on that analysis. As I sat one day with the president in an advisory capacity, he said, "Stephen, I just can't believe what this man has done. He's not only given me the information I requested, but he's provided additional information that's exactly what we needed. He even gave me his analysis of it in terms of my deepest concerns and a list of his recommendations. The recommendations are consistent with the analysis, and the analysis is consistent with the data. He's remarkable. What a relief not to have to worry about this part of the business." At the next meeting, it was, "Go for this and go for that," to all of the executives but one. To this man, it was, "What's your opinion?" His circle of influence had grown. This man's success was not dependent on his circumstances. Many others were in the same situation. It was his chosen response to those circumstances, his focus on his circle of influence, that made the difference. So, once in a while, we will be in a situation where a lot of things might be outside of our circle of influence. But we can always be proactive even then. We can always control the line on the bottom of our face. We can choose to smile. If you're willing and interested, if everyone would just please smile, a really big, genuine, heartfelt smile. When I smile, I feel good. I feel happy. So much better than when I frown. This is a good thing. So we always have the choice to be proactive. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we call it Shifting Paradigms and the Glorious Art of Proactivity. Thank you.